Today, one of the most pervasive phrases in our culture is social justice. It's everywhere in our systems of education, in business, in sports, in the media, and even now in many of our churches. We're all encouraged to join in the fight for social justice. But what exactly is social justice, and how do its advocates define it? And is that definition different than what we read about justice in the Bible? Because justice is such a central word to the Bible, this is a really critical question. We have to get the definition of this word right. Words are precious conveyors of reality. They not only shape the way that we think, but they determine our choices and our actions. And they shape the kind of cultures that we live in. If you want to change society, you begin by changing language. Our adversary knows this all too well. In recent decades, a strategic redefining of many critical words has led to dramatic cultural changes for the worse. People have absorbed these false redefinitions uncritically, including many Christians. And in doing so, they've become unwitting agents in advancing non-Christian systems of belief that are tearing our nation apart. This is a disaster for the church and for the society. To turn things around, we have to recover the true definitions of at least 10 critical words. And one of these words is justice. Justice means conformity to God's moral standard as it's revealed in the Ten Commandments and the royal law in the New Testament, which is love your neighbor as yourself. Justice involves living in a right relationship with God and giving people their due as image bearers of God. It also involves impartially rendering judgment, righting wrongs, and punishing lawbreakers. Justice is alignment to a moral standard of righteousness or goodness. Now, we often think of a moral standard as a law. And for most of us, when we think of laws, we think of legal codes enacted by politicians and civil authorities. But is there a law that transcends man-made laws? Is there a higher standard to which even the powerful are accountable? The answer is yes, God's law, or what Christian apologist Greg Koukl calls the law over everything and everyone. Now, justice is actually a conformity to this higher law. Without that higher law, justice becomes arbitrary and changeable based on whoever wields power. This higher law is actually rooted in God's character, and He is entirely holy and righteous. As it says in Deuteronomy 32:4, God is the immovable rock whose work is perfect. All His ways are justice. A God of faithfulness who does no wrong. Upright and just is He. Now, God has revealed this higher law to us in at least two primary ways. First of all, He's revealed it to us inwardly. Because we are image bearers of God, we all have a built-in sense of this law that's, quote, imprinted on our hearts, unquote. We call this our conscience, and it guides us in doing what is right. God's also communicated it to us through the Ten Commandments, which is really one of His greatest gifts to humankind. It provides the only true and unchanging foundation for justice in human history. The Ten Commandments define how we ought to treat God and each other. They define what kind of behavior is good and right and what is not. So, what does obeying the Ten Commandments look like in our daily lives? Well, according to Pastor Kevin DeYoung, it looks something like this: being impartial, remaining faithful to your spouse, paying what you owe, not stealing, not taking bribes, and not taking advantage of the weak. Beyond personal righteousness, justice also involves God-ordained authorities upholding the law by rendering judgments and punishing lawbreakers. These authorities include parents in the home, or elders in the church, teachers in the schoolroom, and civil authorities in the state. Authorities have to do this fairly, treating everyone equally before the law, because that is how God treats us. Those who commit injustices incur a debt against their victims. That debt might be stolen property or stolen freedom or innocence or reputation or even life. Now, justice demands that that debt be paid. No payment, no justice. As fallen creatures, this is bad news for us because we're all guilty of injustice. We all find it easy to shade the truth, to steal, to cheat, slander, abuse, attack, or even worse, and all motivated by selfish ends. As the Bible says, none is righteous, no, not one. All of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Now, God isn't indifferent to injustice. He actually hates it, and it stirs up his wrath because he cares deeply about the victims of injustice. God is fully committed to dealing with injustice. No injustice will be overlooked, not yours, not mine, or anyone else's. Every lawless act will have to be accounted for and punished. God will ensure that perfect justice prevails. So that's the bad news for us as lawbreakers, but thankfully there's good news too. God provided a way for us to escape the punishment that our lawlessness has earned us, a way that displays his glory in all of its radiant splendor. In an act of sheer love and mercy, God sent his own Son Jesus to take on himself the punishment that we deserved by dying on a cross. As the Apostle Paul said in 2 Corinthians 5:21, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. God's mercy and justice meet at the cross. This indescribable gift of forgiveness in Jesus Christ is available to all of us, no matter how great our sins. What does a culture that's shaped by this true understanding of justice look like? Now, here's just a few hallmarks of such a culture. First of all, they uphold what we call the rule of law. This means that God-ordained authorities who create the laws and administer justice are themselves under the law. They also respect God's higher law, and they create man-made laws that conform to that higher law, or the Ten Commandments. Secondly, they uphold the ideal of blind justice. What that means is that those who administer justice are impartial. They don't favor certain groups based on things like skin color or social status. And those who administer justice refuse to have their judgments influenced by bribery. Why is this? Well, because in Deuteronomy 10:17, it says that the one true God shows no favoritism and takes no bribes. We create societies in the image of the God that we worship. Third, these societies uphold what is called due process. This is the kind of respectful treatment that those who are accused of injustice are due as image bearers of God. It includes things like a timely trial by an unbiased judge and the truthful testimony of multiple witnesses before a finding of guilt. Another hallmark of societies that are shaped by true justice is a deep concern for the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed. And then lastly, societies that are shaped by this true understanding of justice, they temper justice with mercy, grace, and forgiveness. Now today, this true understanding of justice has been radically redefined in our mainstream culture. It's been replaced by what is popularly called social justice. Now here's what the advocates of social justice mean when they use that term. Social justice is the deconstructing of traditional systems and structures that are deemed to be oppressive, and the redistribution of power and resources from oppressors to their victims in pursuit of what they call equity, which is equality of outcome. This redefined understanding of justice has its roots in Marxist thought, which is obsessed with things like power, oppression, and victimization. The Marxist worldview sees a world that's divided between evil oppressors and innocent victims in a zero-sum struggle for power. It's deeply hostile to Christian morality, and particularly Christian views on marriage, the family, and sexuality. According to this ideology, evil doesn't originate in the human heart. There is no doctrine of human depravity. Instead, evil is sourced outside of us in society, in the social structures and systems and institutions and cultural norms that perpetuate inequalities between groups. Today, the oppressive group is defined primarily as white Christian males. That would be somebody like me. The system of oppression that they have instituted and needs to be deconstructed includes things like whiteness or white supremacy, the patriarchy, toxic masculinity, the natural family, biblical sexual norms, and things like the male-female binary. Oppressed victims in this scheme are defined as people of color, females, and those that belong to or identify with the LGBTQ+. What we call social justice today was really developed by academic social theorists back in Germany in the 1940s and 50s. They called themselves the Frankfurt School of Applied Marxism, and they called their project Cultural Marxism. After World War II, they fled Germany to the United States, and they began to embed their so-called critical theories into our universities, starting in New York and then in California. And utilizing a strategy that they called the Long March through the institutions, these social theorists and their followers successfully drove their ideas into public education, into media, entertainment, big business, and politics. And their hard work and their perseverance has really paid off with stunning success. In fact, today, cultural Marxism, believe it or not, is the dominant belief system of our institutional leaders in the West. Its champions have captured the commanding heights of nearly every major field and institution, and they've even made significant inroads into the evangelical church.
No CRT!
There's a fight now about CRT, critical race theory.
No justice! No peace!
CRT argues that racism is endemic to America, that every American institution exists to uphold white supremacy. Nomani calls that propaganda that's claiming our children. How is it claiming the children? That's exaggeration.
This idea that we have of critical race theory has become this phenomena of woke baby.
Books like these are now part of the curriculum. This book's supposed to teach kindergarten kids about America's violent white supremacy. Dude, we can see your pointy tail. Contract. Binding you to whiteness. You get stolen land. Sign away your soul. So white people are the devil.
Yeah.
You know, that's pretty over the top. But look, how much influence does this author have on school kids? One or two books like this.
I think it's devastating. I mean, just imagine if a black child was to get a book like this that said blackness is a bad deal.
Disturbing news as a group of pro-life activists from Nashville were recently found guilty in federal court under the FACE Act for quietly and peacefully protesting outside a local abortion clinic.
Now facing charges after protesting outside of an abortion clinic on Fulton in Grand Rapids.
The police chief tells us that the protesters were blocking the clinic's driveway, and they were warned that they would be arrested if they didn't.
Today, as their theories are implemented, we see the bitter fruit everywhere. Their upside-down morality is untethered from God or His law. In fact, what God calls evil, they call good. For example, abortion is now rebranded as reproductive justice, and it's portrayed as a positive good, while those who fight to protect unborn life are increasingly treated as lawbreakers. And so are those who fight to protect the male-female binary and marriage, and even those who are fighting to keep males from competing on women's sports teams. Doing that today will open you up to public ridicule, to shaming, and in some cases even to fines and penalties. According to this upside-down morality of social justice, members of the LGBTQ community, they're innocent victims, while those who uphold Christian sexual norms are evil oppressors. So to rectify this supposed injustice, LGBTQ activists are increasingly mainstreaming their ideas as a positive good and pushing them aggressively on our children in public schools, often without the consent of parents. Former mainstream legal norms, such as the rule of law and due process, impartiality, and the presumption of innocence, all of these are being discarded. Moral guilt is now ascribed not based on actions, but based on immutable characteristics like skin color. So if you're a member of a so-called oppressor group, you are considered guilty regardless of what you've done. And if you're a member of a so-called victim group, you are presumed to be innocent, again, irrespective of your actions. Finally, this Marxist-inspired social justice has no place in it for mercy, grace, or forgiveness. There's only grievance, condemnation, and retribution. Bigots and oppressors must be destroyed. These deadly ideas are tearing the social fabric apart. So what kind of society do you want to live in? What understanding of justice do you want to shape society? Words matter. They're powerful. All genuine social change, for better or worse, begins with a shift in language and definitions. God reveals the true definition of justice in His Word, the Bible. These actual definitions, they're not just true for Christians. They're true for everyone. But unless we, as Christians, know the true definitions and build our lives on them, unless we defend these true definitions in the public square, our societies will be built on false definitions and will reap the terrible consequences. If you want to be part of upholding and defending the truth about justice, we can help.